It began on an ordinary Tuesday in April. I had rushed out early for an important client meeting, forgetting to bring in the trash bins from the previous day's collection. By the time I returned home that evening, exhausted but satisfied with landing a new contract, there it was, a bright yellow envelope stuck to my front door. It fluttered slightly in the evening breeze, an innocent-looking thing that would soon unleash chaos in my life. I pulled it from the door and tore it open, expecting perhaps a neighborhood announcement or community invitation. Instead, I found an official citation from our homeowners association. For leaving my trash bins at the curb approximately 9 hours past the designated retrieval time, I was being fined $10. $10. The citation included a highlighted passage from the community bylaws and a deadline for payment within 7 days, or additional penalties would apply. I stood there on my porch, reading and rereading the notice, feeling a mixture of confusion and irritation rise inside my chest. This seemed excessive for a first-time oversight. In the 3 years I had lived here, I had never received a single violation. My lawn was always maintained, my house freshly painted, my holiday decorations tasteful and removed promptly. I decided to speak with someone from the HOA board directly rather than simply pay the fine. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, a silver Mercedes pulled up in front of my house. A woman in her 50s emerged, dressed in a blazer despite the warm weather, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. I recognized her as Karen Winters, the recently elected HOA president. She marched up my driveway clutching a tablet, her eyes scanning my property like a prison guard inspecting a cell. "Good morning," I called out politely. I was actually hopping to speak with someone about this citation. Karen turned to me, her expression hardening. "Are you disputing the violation?" Her voice carried across the quiet morning air, deliberately loud enough for any neighbors to hear. "Not disputing, exactly. I just thought perhaps a warning would be more appropriate for a first offense. I had an early meeting and simply forgot." "The bylaws are very clear," she interrupted, holding up her hand as though stopping traffic. Section 8, Paragraph 3 states that all refuse containers must be removed from street view within 2 hours of collection. Yours remained visible for over 9 hours. She pointed at the exact spot where my bins had stood the previous day, as though the ghost of my violation still lingered there. "I understand that, but—" "Furthermore," she continued, raising her voice even more, "maintaining community standards is not optional. It is mandatory. When one homeowner neglects their responsibilities, it affects all property values." She gestured broadly at the surrounding houses. My neighbor Tom was retrieving his newspaper, and I noticed him quickly averting his eyes and hurrying back inside. Something about this interaction felt performative, as though Karen was establishing dominance not just with me, but for anyone watching. "Look, Ms. Winters, I am not refusing to pay. I am simply suggesting that a warning system might foster better community relations than immediate fines." Karen's eyes narrowed. "This is not a democracy, Mr. Harrison. This is a covenant-controlled community. The rules were established when you purchased your home. The fine stands." She tapped aggressively on her tablet. "In fact, I notice your hedges are approximately 2 inches over the maximum height restriction. That would be another violation." I felt my blood pressure rising. Those hedges were trimmed last week to exactly the specified height. They could not possibly have grown 2 inches in 7 days. Karen produced a measuring tape from her blazer pocket. "Would you like me to measure them now and document the results?" Several neighbors had now emerged from their homes, pretending to collect mail or water plants while stealing glances at our confrontation. I noticed Mrs. Rodriguez across the street shaking her head slightly at me, a warning in her eyes. "That will not be necessary," I replied, working to keep my voice level. "I will pay the fine." "Wise choice." Karen smiled, but the expression never reached her eyes. "The board appreciates your cooperation." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "I would like to submit a formal complaint about the fine process. To whom should I address it?" Karen froze momentarily before turning back to face me. "All complaints go through me before reaching the board, but I would reconsider that course of action if I were you. Those who fight the system often find themselves facing increased scrutiny." That evening, several neighbors stopped by under various pretexts: borrowing sugar, returning mail delivered to the wrong address, asking about my sprinkler system. Each conversation eventually turned to Karen. "She has been on a rampage since winning the election," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered. "3 families have already put their homes on the market. She fined the Johnsons $50 because their 10-year-old left a bicycle on the lawn overnight," another neighbor added. I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board, detailing both the citation and Karen's threatening behavior. The next morning, I hand-delivered it to the community clubhouse where board meetings were held. Karen was there, sorting through papers. "What is this?" she asked, snatching the envelope from my hand. "A formal complaint for the board to review." Without breaking eye contact, she tore the envelope open, removed my carefully typed letter, and ripped it into pieces. The confetti of my complaint fluttered to the floor between us. "Know your place," she said quietly. "This is my neighborhood now." As I walked back home, a fire ignited in my chest, not just anger but determination. Something told me this $10 fine was only the beginning. But Karen had made a critical mistake. She had assumed I would back down. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The retaliation began almost immediately. The day after I attempted to file my complaint, a new citation appeared on my door, this time for excessive weed growth, in a flower bed that had been professionally landscaped just 2 weeks prior. I photographed the immaculate garden bed before reluctantly paying the $25 fine. 3 days later, another citation appeared: improper storage of garden hose, because my coiled hose was visible from the street. Another $25. Within 2 weeks, I had accumulated 7 violations totaling over $200, each more absurd than the last. At first, I attempted to address them through proper channels, sending emails to the board members listed on the community website. My messages went unanswered. When I called the property management company that oversaw our HOA, I was told all enforcement decisions had been delegated to the board president. It became clear that Karen had built herself a small fiefdom. At the monthly board meeting, which I attended along with an unusually large number of other homeowners, she sat at the center of the table flanked by 4 other board members, all friends from her social circle. They rubber-stamped her every decision, barely glancing at the documentation she presented. When I rose to speak during the public comment period, Karen limited me to precisely 2 minutes, cutting me off mid-sentence when my time elapsed. The board members avoided eye contact as I presented evidence of selective enforcement and harassment. One of them, a nervous man named Richard, seemed uncomfortable but remained silent. "The board thanks you for your input," Karen said dismissively. "Next item on the agenda." My situation had become untenable. I installed security cameras around my property, doorbell camera, floodlight cameras at each corner of the house, all recording continuously. Within days, I captured footage of Karen walking along my property line at 7:30 in the morning, photographing my windows and doors. Later that same day, she returned with a clipboard, spending nearly 20 minutes scrutinizing my home from various angles. When I mowed my lawn the following Saturday at 10:00 a.m., well within the permitted hours, another citation appeared by afternoon. Excessive noise disturbance, it read, with a $75 fine attached. The citation claimed multiple neighbors had complained about the early morning disturbance. When I requested the names of these neighbors under our HOA's transparency clause, Karen denied my request, citing complainant confidentiality. Then my mail began arriving opened or damaged. Packages disappeared from my porch minutes after delivery, only to reappear hours later, clearly tampered with. When I reported this to the local postal inspector, they launched an investigation. Karen appeared at my door the very next day. Making false reports about mail theft is a federal offense, she informed me, standing uncomfortably close to my doorway. You really should be careful about the accusations you make. I raised my phone, recording our interaction. Are you threatening me, Karen? Her smile never wavered, just offering friendly advice. This community has standards, and those who cannot maintain them often find it uncomfortable to stay. She glanced at my security cameras. Those are non-standard installations, by the way. The Architectural Review Committee will need to evaluate them. I attempted to rally support among my neighbors, hosting a small gathering to discuss HOA reform. Only 4 people attended. The others sent apologetic texts, expressing support but citing fears of retaliation. One family had a college scholarship for their son tied to community volunteerism, controlled by Karen's committee. Another ran a home business that required board approval for operation. Karen had systematically ensured everyone had something to lose. After my small meeting, the citations increased in both frequency and amount. My driveway was suddenly improperly sealed. My holiday lights, in season and modest, were excessive illumination. When I replaced a broken fence picket, I was cited for unauthorized structural modification. As I sorted through the latest batch of violations, Karen's car slowed in front of my house. She rolled down her window. "Nobody beats the HOA," she called out, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "Not here." She did not know I had already contacted an attorney specializing in homeowner rights. She did not know I had been documenting every interaction, every citation, building a case methodically and quietly. Karen thought she was winning, but the real battle had not even begun. The courthouse steps seemed to stretch endlessly upward as I climbed them that Monday morning. My attorney, Diane Sawyer, no relation to the journalist, walked beside me carrying a leather briefcase filled with 3 months of meticulous documentation. We had filed for a restraining order against Karen and brought a civil suit against both her personally and the HOA board for harassment, selective enforcement, and abuse of power. "Remember," Diane cautioned as we reached the courthouse doors, "Judge Matthews has a reputation for strict adherence to procedure. Stick to facts, avoid emotional language, and let the evidence speak for itself." We were scheduled for 9:30 a.m. in courtroom 3. We arrived 20 minutes early, but Karen was already there. She sat in the front row wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked more appropriate for a criminal prosecution than a civil hearing. Beside her sat Richard from the board and a stern-looking man I assumed was her attorney. She did not acknowledge my presence, but I noticed her back stiffen as I walked past. At precisely 9:30, Judge Matthews entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they fell upon. As the bailiff called the court to order, I felt a momentary flutter of doubt. What if Karen's influence extended even here? My concerns dissipated as Judge Matthews began the proceedings. Her first statement set the tone for everything that followed. "Let me be absolutely clear," she addressed both parties. This court views homeowners association disputes as civil matters between private citizens and organizations. This is not a criminal proceeding, and I expect all parties to comport themselves accordingly. Her gaze lingered on Karen's formal attire. My attorney presented our case first, a methodical timeline of events beginning with the initial trash bin citation and escalating through months of targeted enforcement. We submitted the security footage showing Karen photographing my property at unusual hours. We presented a statistical analysis of citations issued in the neighborhood, revealing that 68% of all violations in the past quarter had been issued to my address alone. When Diane displayed photographs of other properties with identical conditions to mine that had received no citations, Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. When we showed the video of her tearing up my formal complaint, she leaned forward and whispered urgently to her attorney. "Objection," Karen's lawyer interrupted. "These videos were taken without my client's knowledge or consent." Judge Matthews removed her glasses. "Counselor, security cameras on private property recording public areas require no special consent in this jurisdiction. Objection overruled." When it was their turn to respond, Karen's strategy became clear: deny everything and attack my character. Her attorney characterized me as a problem resident who had refused to comply with community standards from the beginning. Karen herself took the stand, describing how my confrontational attitude had disrupted the harmony of the neighborhood. As my attorney cross-examined her, Karen grew increasingly agitated. She contradicted herself regarding dates, denied conversations that we had on video, and repeatedly interrupted both Diane and the judge. "Ms. Winters," Judge Matthews warned after the third interruption, "you will allow counsel to complete her questions before responding." "But she is twisting my words," Karen protested. "That is not for you to determine," the judge replied firmly. "Answer the questions as asked." When Diane presented evidence that Karen had personally destroyed my formal complaint rather than submitting it to the board, Karen's composure cracked entirely. "He was undermining my authority," she exclaimed. "The bylaws clearly state that the president has discretionary power over complaints." "Can you point to that specific bylaw?" Diane asked calmly. Karen fumbled through the community governance documents, growing increasingly frustrated. "It is implied in the Presidential Powers Clause." "For the record," Diane noted, "there is no such clause granting discretionary power to dispose of formal complaints." "This is ridiculous," Karen snapped. "I am trying to maintain standards in a community where people like him think rules do not apply to them." Judge Matthews leaned forward. "Ms. Winters, I remind you that this court operates on facts and evidence, not personal grievances. Your emotional response to legitimate questions concerns me regarding your fitness for your position." "My fitness?" Karen's voice rose sharply. "I have single-handedly raised property values by 15% through strict enforcement. The community elected me to maintain standards." "Ms. Winters," the judge's tone hardened, "I am finding you in contempt of court for your continued disruptive behavior. You will be fined $500, payable immediately." Something in Karen seemed to snap at that moment. Her face flushed crimson, and before anyone could react, she lunged toward the bench. "You have no right," she screamed, and then, in a moment that would soon become infamous, she slapped Judge Matthews across the face. The courtroom froze in collective shock. The bailiff moved with surprising speed for his size, restraining Karen as she continued to shout about conspiracies and injustice. Judge Matthews, to her credit, remained composed despite the red mark blooming on her cheek. Ms. Winters is remanded into custody for assault on an officer of the court, she stated calmly. This hearing is adjourned until tomorrow. Counselors, remain for instructions. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, still shouting about her rights, I sat stunned. I had come seeking protection from harassment. I never imagined I would witness the complete implosion of my tormentor in open court. The courthouse steps, which had seemed so imposing that morning, now hosted a different kind of spectacle. By the time my attorney and I emerged from our meeting with Judge Matthews, 3 news vans had parked along the curb. Reporters clutching microphones stood ready, having caught wind of what was already being called the HOA slap heard around the county. I tried to duck past them, but a reporter from Channel 7 intercepted me. "Sir, is it true the HOA president who attacked Judge Matthews was targeting you specifically? Can you tell us about the harassment?" Before I could formulate a response, my phone began vibrating continuously with notifications. A court intern had captured the entire incident on their phone, Karen lunging at the judge, the slap, the shocked faces of everyone present. The 20-second clip was already circulating on social media, spreading like wildfire through local community groups. By dinner time, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. By the following morning, it had gone national. HOA horror, power-tripping president attacks judge, read one headline. SLAPPY Karen, when HOA power goes too far, proclaimed another. The memes began appearing by noon, Karen's angry face superimposed onto historical paintings of tyrants, movie posters with titles like The Slappening, No Judge is Safe. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that very evening. I attended along with nearly every homeowner in the community. People crammed into the small clubhouse, standing against walls and spilling out onto the patio. Richard, visibly uncomfortable in his temporary role as acting president, called the meeting to order. "In light of recent events," he began hesitantly, "the board wishes to express its profound disappointment in Ms. Winters' actions. We want to assure the community that her behavior does not reflect the values of this board or our neighborhood." A woman in the back called out, "You approved every single one of her abusive citations for months. You sat there while she targeted residents." Richard's face flushed. "The board was. We were not fully informed of the extent." "Nonsense," someone else interrupted. "You were at every meeting, you saw what she was doing." The meeting devolved into a public reckoning as homeowner after homeowner stood to share their experiences. Stories poured out, selective enforcement, personal vendettas, threats of liens over minor infractions. One elderly resident tearfully described being fined for planting unauthorized vegetation, a memorial rose bush for her deceased husband. Meanwhile, my email inbox and physical mailbox began filling with messages of support. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact for months now approached me openly. "We should have stood with you sooner," one admitted. "We were afraid of becoming her next target." A manila envelope appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside, I found documentation going back 2 years, board meeting minutes that had never been publicly released, altered financial records, and a list of problem residents with my name at the top, along with notations about how to encourage compliance through targeted enforcement. The anonymous whistleblower had included a note. "Some of us wanted to stop this long ago. Thank you for being braver than we were." 3 days after the courthouse incident, I received a call from a producer at a national morning news program. They wanted to interview me about HOA overreach in America. Shortly after, a popular evening news show requested similar access. I declined both, uncomfortable with the growing spectacle. This had never been about publicity for me, only about justice and the right to live peacefully in my own home. Karen remained in custody, having been denied bail due to the judge assault charge, combined with what prosecutors were now characterizing as a pattern of intimidation and abuse of power. Her husband appeared briefly at their home, loading suitcases into his car before driving away without speaking to anyone. What had begun as my personal stand against unfair treatment had transformed into something much larger, a community finding its collective voice after years of intimidation. As one neighbor put it while we talked across our fence line, "You did not just expose Karen, you broke the spell she had cast over all of us." Karen's preliminary hearing was assigned to a judge from a neighboring county, an obvious precaution given her assault on Judge Matthews. The courtroom was packed with spectators, including dozens of my neighbors. Karen entered wearing an orange jumpsuit rather than her customary business attire, the contrast so stark it elicited audible whispers. Her attorney immediately requested the charges be reduced to a misdemeanor, arguing that Karen had been under extreme stress and had momentarily lost control in an otherwise exemplary life of community service. Judge Patel, a severe man with a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings, reviewed the request silently before looking up. Motion denied. The defendant assaulted an officer of the court in the performance of her duties. The felony charge stands. Karen pleaded not guilty and demanded a jury trial. As she was led away, she turned toward the gallery where many community members sat. Her expression contained no remorse, only cold determination. The prosecution built a methodical case. What had begun as a simple assault charge expanded as evidence mounted. Subpoenas for HOA records revealed financial irregularities, selective waiving of fees for Karen's friends while aggressively pursuing others, using HOA legal funds for personal vendettas, even altering meeting minutes to support her decisions retroactively. Then came the witnesses. Neighbors I had barely spoken to lined up to testify about their own experiences. Mrs. Rodriguez described how Karen had threatened to report her son's weekend automotive hobby as an illegal business, unless she voted for Karen's slate of candidates in the board election. The Johnsons testified about being fined for their child's bicycle, while Karen's grandchildren regularly left toys scattered across her front yard with no consequences. Most damning was Richard's testimony. The nervous board member had finally found his courage. He described how Karen had systematically gathered compromising information on each board member to ensure their compliance. Knowledge of unreported home businesses, unauthorized renovations, personal secrets that could cause embarrassment if revealed. She kept a file on everyone, Richard testified, voice quavering. She called it her insurance policy against dissent. When asked why he had not reported this behavior sooner, he looked down at his hands. She told us nobody would believe us, that she had connections in local government, in the police department, in the courts. After a while, we believed her. The prosecution presented emails Karen had sent to board members, their threatening tone undeniable. Remember who knows about your unpermitted sunroom when you consider your vote on Thursday. It would be unfortunate if the county learned about your mother's unreported residency in your home. Your support during the meeting is expected. We would hate to revisit the matter of your fence variance. Karen's defense strategy shifted from claiming momentary lapse to absolute denial. She portrayed herself as a dedicated volunteer being persecuted for having high standards. She accused neighbors of conspiring against her because she had demanded excellence in a community that preferred mediocrity. On the witness stand, Karen remained defiant. When confronted with video evidence of her entering my mailbox, she claimed she was securing loose mail about to blow away. When shown footage of her measuring my hedge at 5:30 a.m., she insisted she was performing routine inspections at a time that would not disturb residents. The prosecution's final piece of evidence was perhaps the most shocking. A spreadsheet Karen had maintained ranking all 126 homes in the community on a compliance probability scale. Next to my name was a simple notation: resistance detected. Accelerate enforcement until property is sold. Throughout the proceedings, Karen showed no remorse. When neighbors testified about the stress her actions had caused, she rolled her eyes. When financial improprieties were detailed, she examined her nails. Her attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted, especially when Karen ignored his advice to show contrition. As the trial concluded, even those who had initially sympathized with her struggled to reconcile the mountain of evidence with the community leader they thought they had known. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as Karen stood stiffly beside her attorney, her expression unreadable as the foreman prepared to speak. On the charge of assault on an officer of the court, we find the defendant guilty. Karen's posture remained rigid, but I noticed her hands tighten into fists. On the charge of mail tampering, a federal offense, we find the defendant guilty. A small gasp escaped from someone in the gallery. On the charge of extortion, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of falsification of official documents, we find the defendant guilty. The list continued, 8 charges in total, guilty on all counts. Karen remained motionless, but her face had drained of color. This was not the outcome she had anticipated. Perhaps until this very moment, she had truly believed her power extended even here, into this courtroom. Judge Patel thanked the jury before turning his attention to Karen. The defendant will approach for sentencing. Karen moved forward mechanically, her attorney following close behind. The judge reviewed some papers before looking directly at her. The camera from the local news station focused tightly on his face, broadcasting the moment live across the county. Ms. Winters, this court has rarely seen such a systematic abuse of power within a community setting. You weaponized rules designed to maintain property values and neighborhood harmony, transforming them into tools of personal vengeance and control. Karen started to speak, but the judge raised his hand. You operated your homeowners association like a personal fiefdom, using intimidation, threats, and selective enforcement to punish those who questioned your authority. When faced with legitimate challenges to this behavior, you responded not with reflection but with escalation, culminating in a physical assault on a judge performing her lawful duties. The courtroom remained absolutely silent. Most troubling to this court is your complete lack of remorse throughout these proceedings. Even now, I see no recognition of the harm you have caused to your community and neighbors. Judge Patel shuffled his papers deliberately. For the assault on Judge Matthews, this court sentences you to 1 year in county jail. For the additional charges of mail tampering, extortion, falsification of documents, and abuse of authority, you are sentenced to 2 years of probation following your incarceration, plus restitution to be paid to the Homeowners Association in the amount of $75,000. Only then did Karen's composure finally break. "This is outrageous," she shouted, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "I was protecting property values. I was maintaining standards. These people should be thanking me." "Remove the defendant," Judge Patel ordered calmly. As bailiffs moved toward her, Karen grew more frantic. "You cannot do this to me. Do you know who I am? I will appeal. I will sue everyone in this room." She struggled against the officers, her carefully maintained persona shattering completely. "This entire community will fall apart without me. You will see. You will all regret this." Her voice continued echoing down the hallway even after she had been removed from the courtroom. The spectators sat in stunned silence, many recording the scene on their phones. Within minutes, clips of her meltdown were already being shared across social media platforms. Outside the courthouse, reporters thrust microphones toward me as I attempted to leave. "How do you feel about the verdict? Will you be pursuing additional civil damages? What happens to the HOA now?" I paused, considering my response carefully. "Today was not about revenge," I finally said. "It was about accountability and justice. No one should have to fear living in their own home because of petty tyranny disguised as rule enforcement." As I walked to my car, neighbors approached to shake my hand or offer quiet thanks. One elderly man gripped my shoulder, tears in his eyes. "For the first time in 5 years," he whispered, "I can put a bird feeder in my yard without fear." I drove home slowly, past Karen's house where a "for sale" sign had already appeared in the front yard. A strange sense of peace washed over me, not triumph, not celebration, but simply the quiet knowledge that justice had finally prevailed. The emergency HOA board election was held 3 weeks after Karen's sentencing. The clubhouse overflowed with residents. People who had never attended a meeting in years now waited in line to cast their votes. The old board had resigned en masse following Richard's testimony, creating 5 vacant positions to be filled. I had not planned to run, but neighbors had submitted my name as a candidate. "You stood up when no one else would," Mrs. Rodriguez told me. "We need someone like you to help rebuild." The meeting room buzzed with conversation as residents actually spoke to one another, many meeting for the first time despite years of living as neighbors. Children played on the clubhouse lawn while parents chatted. Someone had brought cookies and punch, giving the event a festive atmosphere that would have been unimaginable under Karen's regime. When the votes were tallied, I found myself elected alongside 4 others who shared a vision for reform: Mrs. Rodriguez, Tom from across the street, a retired judge named Mr. Patel, no relation to the sentencing judge, and a young environmental lawyer named Sarah. Our first official meeting drew a standing room-only crowd. "Our priority," I announced as we began, "is to review all rules and fines imposed over the past 3 years. Any citation issued without proper documentation or justification will be rescinded and refunded." The room erupted in applause. Over the following months, we systematically dismantled Karen's legacy. The excessive fine structure was replaced with a warning system for first offenses. The architectural review process was simplified and made transparent. Community decisions were put to votes rather than board mandates. Most importantly, we created a community oversight committee, elected residents not on the board who could review complaints about board actions or decisions. No longer would power concentrate in the hands of a single person or small group. 6 weeks into Karen's incarceration, a letter arrived at the clubhouse addressed to the board. Her handwriting was precise and controlled, the tone unapologetic. She blamed everyone but herself: corrupt judges, jealous neighbors, a community too ignorant to appreciate proper standards. She demanded her position be held for her return and suggested the neighborhood would regret replacing her. No one bothered to respond. Life in our community transformed. The spring brought the first neighborhood-wide yard sale in years. Summer saw impromptu barbecues and children playing freely between yards. By fall, We hosted a Halloween decoration contest with no rules beyond safety considerations, resulting in creative displays that brought visitors from surrounding neighborhoods. One evening, as I sat on my front porch enjoying the cool autumn air, I reflected on how something as trivial as a $10 fine had exposed so much darkness, but ultimately led to profound positive change. My neighbor Tom wandered over, offering a beer as he settled into the chair beside me. "Remember when we used to hide inside to avoid Karen's inspection tour?" he laughed. "Hard to believe that was less than a year ago," I replied. We sat in comfortable silence, watching as neighbors walked dogs, children rode bicycles, and a sense of genuine community flourished around us. The trash bins would still be collected every Tuesday, the lawns would still be mowed, the houses maintained, but now out of pride rather than fear. That $10 fine had indeed been just the beginning, not of Karen's victory, as she had imagined, but of her downfall and our neighborhood's rebirth.